we're now moving toward our final phase, but we sometimes save the best for last. And unfortunately, I have yet another cancellation to announce. Aaron Burrows of our groundbreaking, volunteer, dramatic, pedagogical program Voices for Violence got sick today. So it's actually 3 of the 4 local people that I had originally agreed to come have had to cancel. But that's okay, because really we have the head honcho who is here. And that is LaToya Hill Smith, who's the Associate Vice President for Institutional Equity. She is our official Title IX officer. And she's also going to tell us some things about Voices Against Violence, and I also see we have some volunteers from that excellent organization here who may want to add some things when we get to the discussion period. But what she is going to tell us about is how we're addressing these issues here at UT Austin. And as I said last night, I think on the whole, our university has been a leader and a model in this area that other universities could learn some things from. I mean, I am not always a sycophant of the administration, but this is an area where I really think we have been doing a good job. And LaToya is going to tell us some more about how.
Thank you, Professor Hubbard. So, as I was introduced, I am the Title IX coordinator here at the university. Prior to taking this position in September of 2015, I was in the Office of the Dean of Students and oversaw student conduct and did Title IX investigations there, as well as oversaw the Student Emergency Services, which does the advocacy and role and part of these type of situations. So my presentation, and I will definitely can speak to some of the history of Voices Against Violence, but I will lean on my colleagues and the students here who are wearing their beautiful VAV t-shirts to help if I miss something, since they are the ones who are on the ground. Ultimately, as the Title IX coordinator, as well as Title IX coordinators institutionally across the country, we are responsible for maintaining and helping the university maintain their mission of having an environment that is free from sex, gender discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual violence, or sexual misconduct. Now, I absolutely understand that this conference and workshop, should I not move? Should I stay still? Oh, okay. Is definitely focused on consent and sexual assault. However, I focus on everything that falls under that Title IX umbrella. So, and you're going to see some statistics in just a little bit that prior to, I would say this year, a majority of the cases we were dealing with fell more in the sexual misconduct, even harassment, stalking area than actual sexual assault. So, part of the Title IX program or office that I'm trying to build is really one looking to see if we have any systemic gaps in how we address issues here on our campus. But really making sure we have a robust program here that addresses Title IX related issues, and that includes prevention and advocacy. It includes resources and support. It also includes research and looking at assessment and seeing, again, how effectively we are handling and addressing these matters. But it also includes accountability. And so part of that is the investigation part, and part of that is also the discipline. Now, as the university commitment states, it does encompass and it does protect both students, faculty, and staff. But for the purpose of this workshop and presentation, I'm solely going to focus on students. So we do have a section here or a department within our university, the Office for Inclusion and Equity, that deals with employee-related matters. However, those numbers are much smaller than our student-related matters, go figure. And so, but there are times when they jointly do intersections, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. So overall, what I'm going to talk about is by the numbers. I thought it would be very helpful for you all to have some statistics. Also being aware of reporting options on our campus and how individuals can report complaints that fall within the Title IX umbrella. I'll also go over into detail about the investigation process and what happens when we receive a report all the way from A to Z. Also talk about, and again, the student discipline process. The process for faculty and staff is different, and so they have different grievance procedures, but again, for the purpose of this presentation, really just wanted to focus on student discipline. And then also, I thought it was very important for you all who are not here at the university to understand the resources and remedies that we enact when we are addressing Title IX complaints, but also kind of on the horizon what the university has done since the Dear Colleague letter from 2011. I am an interactive presenter, and since it's just me, and there's nobody following behind me, if you do have questions while I'm speaking about things, feel free to interrupt and ask questions. So these are the statistics as of April 7th of this year. I decided to include 2013-14, 14-15, and 15-16. So that you understand the structure here at the university, there is a Title IX training and investigation unit within the Office of the Dean of Students. They are the ones who do the investigations as it relates to student complaints. As I mentioned earlier, the Office for Inclusion and Equity investigate employee-related complaints. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt, but if you have an individual who is an employee but also a student, where do they go? And where do they
Excellent
count?
question. That's where the joint investigations start. So it will start initially with the Office of the Dean of Students, because for most of our student employees, their status as an employee is part of being a student at our university. So, for example, our graduate students are teaching assistants. They could actually go through two processes, both from an employee side as well as the student side.
So they would show up saying these numbers, but also numbers from the other office?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So these encompass, as you will see, both assault, stalking and harassment, sexual misconduct, relationship violence, and other. We had to incorporate that category this year because we had examples, surveillance, videotaping, revenge porn. That was what we were categorizing as other. So, and so those are things that we are now more frequently dealing with than we had in years past. You'll notice from the statistics that they are continuing to go up every year. I do not believe that they are going up because it's occurring more frequently. I believe our numbers are increasing because individuals are more aware of the process, how to report, and we are creating a system that allows individuals and makes it more comfortable for people to come forward and report these types of complaints at our institution. As you can see, as April 7th, we are at 183 actual complaints that we have investigated. We've already surpassed, the semester is not even over. I do anticipate that we will hit over 200. And comparatively to other institutions of our size, we are having, while I do believe we underreport still at this institution, we have higher reporting numbers than other institutions of our size. So these are the statistics, again, overall that we are dealing with Title IX. Now, I think it's important to note that there is, as I mentioned earlier, Student Emergency Services is our advocacy support branch of the Office of the Dean of Students. And so you do have students who come in that report these type of complaints or being impacted by these type of incidents where the perpetrator, or the terminology we use here as respondent, is not affiliated with the institution, or it happened in high school, or it happened years before, and we still provide remedy, resources, and support to those students. And so those numbers are a bit higher. So for this year, they have 200, right now at this point, about 205 particular issues where students have come forward and said, I'm being impacted because I was being stalked or harassed or I had been sexually assaulted previously. They are the biggest referral over to the Title IX Investigations Unit, so a lot of our complaints come in through Student Emergency Services. So these are some reporting options on our campus. Responsible employees, which the university defines as faculty, staff, teaching assistants, assistant instructors, coaches, and so it is a wide variety of individuals who are responsible employees and therefore are mandated reporters. And so that full list is in our Handbook of Operating Procedures 3-3031, or in our institutional rules, our General Information Catalog, Appendix D. And so a list of who is deemed as responsible employees is listed there.
LaToya, could I interrupt
Sure.
you there? Actually, I was having a conversation with a colleague from the University of Virginia who told me she was a responsible reporter when she learned about an incident affecting one of her students. And I said, oh, I don't think we have such a policy here. This is the first I've heard about it.
Okay.
Has this been incorporated into that training module that we're supposed to do every couple of years now? Because I know it wasn't in there the last time I did.
You bring up an excellent point, which is right now the big rock that I'm dealing with, which is how to handle education and training of 70,000 plus people. And so, yes, it is now in the compliance module, so our new employees receive it, or anyone who's at that 2-year mark where they have to get the compliance training, they know that they are responsible employees. And certain departments, for example, the School of Social Work has asked me to come out and do a training, so all the faculty in the School of Social Work know their roles, responsibilities. Sociology has done it. Certain other departments have now have a better understanding about their roles as responsible employees.
And we're mandated to report this even if the student who has told us would prefer to keep it private.
Yes. And I can go into why that is in just a second.
Yeah, please
Okay.
go.
So you can also file online. So there's a Title IX website. One of the things that I inherited was, to be honest, a very weak website at our institution. It needed to be more robust. As I did some research and looking at other institutions, that's where, and some of the feedback I received from some students was that that's where they go for information, is a website. And so we will hopefully be able to launch the new website in the next couple of weeks that will have more information, more handouts, more resources, just to talk about the general process, resources, how to help a survivor, all of those information that I thought would be relevant for someone who needed to go and get some assistance. And then there are some confidential options because, you do have students who want, or individuals who want to talk about what happened but don't necessarily want this, as I like to say, this UT train take off. And so we do have confidential options, the Counseling and Mental Health Center, the Employee Assistance Program, and the University Health Services as, medical doctors and nurse practitioners. As I've done some more, part of my role here, again, as I mentioned earlier, is to look at some systemic gaps. I see this as a gap. If a student or an individual does not want to go to counseling, but just needs to talk to somebody about the process, what has to happen, we don't have that option here. And so we need that option here. So right now, I'm trying to figure out how we're going to whether have confidential advocates on our campus or this making the Ombuds office non-mandatory reporters. So I'm trying to figure out different options, but that to me is a gap here at our institution that we need to fill, because you have individuals who may not want to go to counseling or may not need to go to the doctor, but do need to talk about it and figure out what they want to do. So to be continued on that, but that's one of my top priorities moving forward. So let's talk about the investigation process. For example, I have the kind of picture chart or the infographic that will be on the website that students can download and kind of take a look at, and gives them an overview of the process. But for the presentation, ultimately, when we receive a report, it's reviewed, and we kind of basically make a determination: does this meet the standard, or are we at a place where we need to actually do an investigation? And let me give you an example. Someone could go to the Student Emergency Services and say, I'm in an emotionally abusive relationship. And that's the term they use. And so, in further exploration, is emotionally abusive, is it just verbal? Is there a physical abuse that goes along with that? And so, if it's just verbal, it may not reach the standard of Title IX that may initiate a Title IX investigation, but we still make sure that the student who's being impacted has the resources and support and knows what their options are as well. So after the report is reviewed, I think what's important for you all to know is that complainants do not, and let me go back again, the terminology that we use, and there's lots of language, but for the purpose of the investigation in the Title IX office, survivors are deemed as complainants, the accused are titled respondents. And that tends to be a best practice across institutions in how you identify particular parties. So for our purpose, the complainant does not have to participate at any point during this process. They can also re-engage at any point. They can step out at any point. Ultimately, we do not want, while the university has an obligation to investigate, if an individual does not want to participate, they do not have to. And we do find several students that, well, yes, we've provided them the resources and the information, but they don't necessarily want to go through the investigation, and that's absolutely okay. So the respondent, though, does have to participate. If they do not, then that automatically would kick it over to student discipline. And so student conduct would then address that because they were not participating in the process, and that is a violation of our institutional rules. But, so for the purpose of this process, let's go through that we have a participant, a respondent, and a complainant that both want to participate fully through this process. So they are met with both parties equally, they both have the opportunity, and for most situations, we try to meet with the complainant first to get their account of what occurred. Sometimes with scheduling that doesn't always happen, but for the most part it does. The complainant is then, and everybody can bring an advisor, that's their right, to have somebody with them and present at the actual interview. And the interview is done by two investigators. You have an individual asking questions, and then you have another one transcribing the conversation that has occurred. So at certain institutions, they require a written statement. While we encourage a written statement, it is not required. So a student can come in and sit down with an investigator, and we capture their statement through those questions.
Can I ask a question? How come you're transcribing rather than recording?
Partially, it's, well, that's a good question. I think legally we've been advised not to record. Now, someone can bring in a recorder with the state of Texas. It's a one-party rule, so as long as somebody knows, let's say I want to record, I don't have to tell the individual. So there are certain individuals that choose to record the interview or take the interview, but we have just been advised to take their statement. Now, I think what's important is that the individuals get to review all of the notes, and they sign off on the notes, can correct the notes before we take them into kind of fact at that point.
So what would the legal reason not to record be?
Good question. I don't know. I know that was a decision made before I took over in this position, so I don't want to make something up and tell you when I don't know the answer at this point. So, yes?
So this process that you're telling us about is very interesting, and the example you're using seems to be student on student. Does it change if it's a student who's made the report, but it's a staff member who they've claimed harmed them, or a faculty member who's claimed? You said the student must participate, but the staff member have to participate, and the faculty member have to participate.
If they are respondent?
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And so this overall process for an employee who's been accused or an employee respondent would follow the same general process, yes.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Do you require faculty members at a state university to apply to a complaint? I mean, has anybody looked at the Fifth Amendment implication of that is that any statement that the faculty member made is deemed involuntary and coerced under the Fifth Amendment. It can't be used in a later criminal case, and it actually creates all sorts of problems with any evidence derived from it. It's what's called Garrity immunity. It's a huge problem to require faculty members to give statements or staff. You're actually totally impacting criminal cases. Has anybody looked at that or suggested that that's a problem?
No, I think ultimately when faculty have been accused or employees have been accused of situations, we allow them, and they again can bring an advisor. A lot of them do choose to bring attorneys, but ultimately we're not making any decisions at that point. We are giving them an opportunity to provide their statement about what happened.
But are you
and respond.
requiring them to speak with employment consequences if they don't?
Yes.
You should talk to a lawyer about that.
Yes.
Right.
You are messing up criminal cases substantially. You're basically immunizing faculty rapists.
Okay. Thank you for that feedback.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Yes.
I want to ask a similar line of questions about the students who are involved. You say they can have an attorney present. Can the attorney answer questions, or is the student expected to be the one speaking during the process?
The latter. So the advisor, whoever that may be, whether it's an attorney or a parent, can confer. And we do allow questions, but ultimately we are wanting the student to provide information. And sometimes in those situations, attorney says, because we do have criminal cases that are going on at the exact same time, the attorney will advise the student not to say anything,
Right.
and that's fine.
I'd rather talk more in detail after the presentation.
Sure.
But that also has tremendous Fifth Amendment implications to students, at the same time without providing the automatic immunity.
Okay.
But instead just made in their Fifth Amendment rights.
All right. We can talk afterwards. Okay.
We have some real legal experts here.
No, I appreciate this. I mean, again, my job is to see systemic gaps, and ultimately, I welcome any feedback and for me to explore these things further. Okay, so where was it? Meeting with relevant parties and collecting evidence. So ultimately, individuals, the complainant, the respondent, both meet with the investigators. And they can provide witnesses at that point if they would like to. They can also provide additional evidence. And sometimes that evidence in these type of situations, social media posts, text messages, phone calls, medical evidence, whatever they choose to provide for us. And sometimes that's police reports, affidavits if they are public. And so those are things that we collect in that next kind of stage there. As everything has been collected, we've spoken to all witnesses, we've spoken to all parties that have been named that may have some knowledge about what occurred. There is then a sense of an analysis, and so the investigators take a look to see if there is enough evidence that meets the university's standard of proof. And so here at the university, it is preponderant, so more likely than not, versus criminal, which, beyond reasonable doubt. And so once they've analyzed it and they make a determination whether yes, we have enough evidence, or no, we do not. And so, or whether the evidence meets our standard, let me say it that way. And then finally, there is a notification of outcome. And so both parties are notified whether it is moving forward with to student discipline or it is not. And so if we do not find that we've met our standard, then it does not move forward to student conduct. But if it does, then at that point, both parties are notified that we move on to the next step. Yes?
If it doesn't meet the standards, if it doesn't go to the next step, the student conduct board, what happens to those cases?
They're closed. Now, both parties do get to review the investigation report. And they get 7 days to send me an email about the adequacy of the investigation. I review all of the notes, the investigation, and if I determine that there was something wrong with the investigation, I can require that they reopen it, and we need more evidence. Now, at any point in time when it's closed, we do let both parties know that at any point, if there's further evidence or information that comes forward, we can reopen the case at any point. Any other questions before I move from, yes?
I'm sorry, so how long, I guess, would you say the process usually is between the reviewing the report and the notifying of the outcome?
Good question. So the Office of Civil Rights gives us strong guidelines to investigate, remedy, and resolve within 60 calendar days. That's not a long time, and so we have moved much faster. I think prior to having Title IX investigators specifically designated to do this, we were taking a lot longer. And there are some cases, because you have some cases that have 10 to 15 witnesses. You have some cases that have lots of evidence, and you have some students that are, wanting, they have a parallel criminal process that's happening at the same time. So we try to respect all of those things. But ultimately, right now, we're averaging about 45 days to beginning to end for an investigation. Okay.
Thank you.
So the student discipline process, again, this is another handout, that flow chart, that our student discipline process is very, I don't want to say complex, but it does have several steps, and it affords both parties several layers of due process. And so I think the overall piece that I want to mention is that both parties are afforded the same due process rights through the beginning to the end of the discipline process. So let's take the scenario all the way through. They have both been notified that the evidence meets the preponderance standard. So at that point, both parties meet with a student judicial services administrator. Usually the complainant meets with the administrator first. And the administrator goes over, again, the findings. They go over what proposed sanctions or penalty, but sanctions is the terminology we use here at the institution, what sanctions that the university is proposing. Our sanctions range anywhere from just general misconduct, range anywhere from written warning to expulsion. For the purpose of sexual assault, we minimally take a look at expulsion. And that has been through guidance from the Office of Civil Rights for us to minimally kind of start there at expulsion. So, but it does range, and anything in between there could be disciplinary probation, deferred suspension, and then ultimately expulsion. But they are both parties meet with the Student Judicial Services Administrator. On the, I guess it's the left side of the kind of flow chart, something called an administrative disposition is presented to both parties, and that outlines again the findings as well as the sanction. And at this part, if they both agree, then the case is resolved, and they can still, though, appeal the sanction to the Office of the President. And you do have some times where the respondent says, you know what, I did it. I agree with the findings, but I don't think I should be suspended. And so at that point, both the respondent and the complainant can appeal to the Office of the President. And we do find in certain situations, especially relationship violence situations where we might deem sanction of suspension, you might have a complaint that says this is too harsh, and so I'm appealing to the Office of the President. I don't want this individual suspended. Yes?
Is the Office of the President annually trained to be qualified to make this appellate decision?
Yes. So on the left side, as I mentioned, the appeal if they both agree. Let's say they do not. Let's say that either party says, you know what, I disagree with the findings, I disagree with the sanction. We then go to a hearing. A hearing is I would say a more formal process in the sense of all parties, the Student Judicial Services will present their case in front of a hearing officer. The respondent will present their case in front of this hearing officer, and if the complainant wants to participate, they also can present their case in front of the hearing officer, and that's evidence, that's statements, and so at that point, the hearing officer is a neutral party that has been appointed by the Office of the President and trained as well, and they hear the matter and then make a determination, again, whether it met our preponderance standard, and then make their determination. Yes?
So, if a complainant doesn't want to participate in the process,
Yes.
how does the respondent get to cross-examine, even through an attorney, through a hearing board? How do they get to actually cross-examine?
That's a good question. They do not get to cross-examine. We
At
do
least my
have,
understanding under the OCR's interpretations in the due process letter, they're not supposed to cross-examine anyway.
that is
No, no, no.
correct.
They're
Well,
not supposed to directly cross-examine.
Cross-examine, yes.
The person who is the accuser isn't supposed to be the one, according to the Department of Education, directly asking the person who they allegedly may have raped. But they're allowed to ask questions through hearing boards, they're allowed to ask questions through counsel, et cetera. So, okay, anyway.
So,
I
but
thought that
to,
even counsel would be considered adversarial.
No, it's just a prohibition on the actual person who's accused, for me, the person saying, did you or did you not do this to be accused, blah, 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 that kind of one.
Okay, well, Laura may be able to clarify.
To be perfectly super technical as a lawyer, it's discouraged, it's not prohibited,
Right.
because it's meant to perpetuate a hostile environment potentially.
Yeah,
So it's
that's the way I
discouraged.
understood.
And there is no right to cross-examine under due process jurisprudence, at least not set precedent. Although I know that fire has a different opinion, that is not the law of the country at this stage.
so in practice here, while they do not directly cross-examine, we have had students who will ask questions through the hearing officer. The hearing officer will review the questions, and then depending on the relevancy of the question or the appropriateness of the question, will then ask the question of the complainant if they are participating. So there is an indirect, but there is not a direct cross-examination.
But the hearing officer may choose not to ask.
That is absolutely correct.
And does the respondent get to know what questions have been asked and have access to the transcript?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Yes, they do.
And who are the hearing officers? What pool are these people from?
So hearing officers, they are coming from the law school. They're from a variety of disciplines. A majority of them are from our School of Law.
Faculty?
Yes, they are. They are faculty. And we do have some staff as well, but most of them are faculty. Okay. Hearing. The hearing officer then makes the determination, and at some institutions, you have a hearing board or a hearing panel. This institution opted to have just an individual hearing officer rendering those decisions. Now, once the decision is made, both the finding as well as the sanctions can also be appealed to the Office of the President by anyone, both the complainant, the respondent, or Student Judicial Services. And the Office of the President's decision for any appeal is final. We've had situations where hearing officers rendered a decision and the Office of the President has modified or overturned it. We've had hearing officer decisions that have been, dismissed by the President. So it does depend, but that is another option, that is the final option at the end of the process. Oh, yes.
Sorry. Again, I'm just sort of curious, does this look the same if the person who's been accused is a staff or especially a tenured faculty member? And what sort of consequences to a tenured faculty member?
Right, so I don't have as much knowledge of that other than we have a faculty grievance appeal process, and so it does not look anything like this because of those very factors. And so the Office for Institutional Equity works with the provost and the faculty grievance appeal process to address those concerns. Yeah. Okay. So I think the other piece that's important to know is, again, how do we remedy and the resources that we have on our campus. Again, by the Office of Civil Rights, our responsibility is to provide, again, remedies. And so even though we may not have an investigation because we don't have a participant or the complainant does not want to give us the name of the respondent, we are not only obligated, but it is our desire to make sure that the university takes care of those who are impacted by these particular situations. And so there can be academic accommodations, whether that's removing them from a class if they choose to, whether that's allowing them to, the terminology is Q-drop, of course, take it online or work with a different faculty member, especially if being in class creates a hostile environment for that particular student. We also have a survivor emergency fund and a student emergency fund. The survivor emergency fund is sponsored by Voices Against Violence, and the student emergency fund is sponsored by the Student Emergency Services. A lot of times those will combine together and provide financial support, whether we need to change residents, pay for lease, pay for locked doors to be changed. Those are things, medical bills, those are things that the survivor or student emergency fund is used for. We also do interim action at this institution. Interim action can be a no contact directive, which is something we put in place for the investigation. And one of that is just to protect the integrity of the investigation. So we ask that they not be in contact with each other during the investigation. Minimally. There is sometimes the Dean of Students has the authority to interim suspend a student, especially if there is a threat to harm to an individual or to the community. So an interim action can also fall under residential, like changing a residence hall room. Again, that will be considered based on context of the factors of the case, the situation. We make determinations again, how do we remedy a situation at least temporarily until an investigation can be completed. So these are some resources that we have on campus. The university has quite a bit. Again, Student Emergency Services handles all types of emergencies and critical incidents, but they also, students know that they can go there, again, for academic support, resources. We have staff that help them, help them understand the protective order, how to get a protective order, a temporary protective order. We also have at our institution where a SANE exam can occur on our campus, and so we partnered with Safe Place, and so the University Health Services offers a space where individuals can get a safe exam on our campus. And so those are resources, again, and information that we really try to disclose to the university community so that individuals know that there is support here on campus. And then Be Vocal is another initiative that happened 2 years ago and has now been supported by UT System. And UT System has required that each UT institution have a bystander intervention program. And so ours is called Be Vocal. And so while they do focus on bystander intervention in a large kind of definition, so hazing, racial bias, harassment, but it's also bystander intervention as it relates to Title IX intervention, sexual assault intervention. And so those are, and they do programming events around helping individuals and equipping individuals with the tools and resources necessary to intervene both actively and passively. And the Voices Against Violence, just to talk a little bit about that, it's been around at least for over 15 years. And again, really focuses on, we have a counseling branch, so we have they are housed within the UT Counseling and Mental Health Center, and ultimately they provide counseling and resources and support to those who are dealing with interpersonal or sexual violence. In addition, there is a programming branch to that as well, and they do awareness campaigns helping with consent. They actually have been very cutting edge and very instrumental, and I think, in making huge strides in changing the rape culture on our campus. And don't get me wrong, I think we have a long way to go, but I think the efforts that Voices Against Violence has done has really started to make this shift in how we define consent, how we talk about consent, and they've been doing that through their interactive theater programming, Get Sexy, Get Consent. I think the new one is I Like You, right? And so, and they do that in orientation as well throughout the academic year, and providing those theater dialogue options so that individuals and students can kind of interact and truly understand in a way that they can relate to. So those are, again, some resources and remedies that we have on our campus that I wanted to highlight because I think, as I was talking to Professor Hubbard earlier, again, we've been doing this for 15 years. So before, there has been this kind of federal spotlight that every institution should have it, Voices Against Violence has been making changes and progress long before 2011. Which brings me to the dear colleague and since then. So in 2015, we hired 6 Title IX investigators. That's all they do. Most institutions, the investigators are housed within student conduct or housed within a different office, and they handle other type of general misconduct. The 6 that are hired, they do not do anything but investigate Title IX related matters. The reason why we put that into place is that initially, just like other institutions, the investigators were in student conduct. And what we found was that because of the caseload, the number of cases we were dealing with, not only were we not being able to address these things and the matter and the guidance, the 60-day guidance, we were also prolonging other type of cases, the resolution of other type of cases. So your academic integrity, your general misconduct, your alcohol. So we were unable to handle those as expediently because our priority and focus was on Title IX. So as a result, a proposal was written and the president funded permanently to hire 6 Title IX investigators. And so, yes.
I was just wondering what kind of background requirements these people have.
So some of them have, they've been student conduct officers before, done investigations. Others have background in working with police, and we had a law enforcement, and then others have sometimes one has a social worker or counseling background, but all of them are trained annually, each semester, on investigation techniques, trauma-informed practice, and so that's required, not only by the Office of Civil Rights, but UT system. Okay, so we also enhanced our university policies. Again, UT system brought out a UT model policy that encouraged, again, the equity and the due process rights for the complainant and the respondent. Years ago, our processes were different, they were confusing for students, so we've kind of combined things again. I think we still have some work to do as it relates to our policies, but that is one step that we've done in the right direction, is at least trying to streamline the policies and make it as easy as possible for individuals in our community to understand. As I mentioned in the very beginning, research is a part of understanding the climate, understanding how effective we are in managing and responding to Title IX related issues. And so in that, especially the School of Social Work has been working with the university community, and in particular to help conduct a campus climate survey in December of this past year, as well as doing some other medium dives and deeper dives about the impact of sexual assault and Title IX related issues on our campus. And so we're doing it in tiers. We finished the first phase, which is the campus climate survey. The second phase is doing focus groups and looking at institutional policies, looking at targeted populations that are vulnerable, and again, really getting a better understanding of the impact of Title IX related incidents on our students. And then also doing the third kind of dive is looking and following a cohort for 4 years and really looking at the emotional, the financial, and academic impact of Title IX related incidents on our students. The other piece, which I mentioned a little bit, the big rock, is how do you educate and bring awareness to a community this size, and that turns over year after year after year. And so that has been one of the largest challenges. As you just mentioned, you're a faculty member and had no idea about your responsible employee status, and I guarantee you that's probably the norm. And so really been taking a look. There is a Title IX task force that is taking a look at this particular issue. We have faculty council representatives, staff council, as well as students that are on this committee to, again, really take a look at, is there a better way, creating a variety of different ways in which we train and provide education and awareness to our campus community. And so this past year, athletics requested from the top down, every athletic coach, staff member, anyone who's employed by athletics had to have mandatory training, and that's something that they are also going to do annually. Other departments have done that. We've done presentations and training for faculty council and certainly teaching assistants and assistant instructors in various departments. So we have a long way to go, so I'm not even going to pretend that we have this figured out. But I do know that that is something that, again, is another priority for the institution. And then we've also enhanced our prevention efforts, and I've talked a little bit about Be Vocal in the Voices Against Violence program. So other than that, that's pretty much it for my presentation. I'm also open to more questions. I actually really appreciate the input that I've received thus far, and so it's going to make me go back and do some more research and talk to my lawyers. Yes.
Another maybe odd question. So as students here on campus, in the campus dorm, somebody busts into his room, sexually assaults him, and you've laid out really nicely, and I appreciate the process that the student can follow. Next door, student's asleep in his dorm room, somebody busts in and pistol whips him. What process does that student get? Does it look the same, or is it the same, or is it?
So just violent behavior in general?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The same accommodations, the same?
Yes, absolutely.
Does it go through the same group?
Not Title IX, so it goes through student conduct, and so they deal with everything non-Title IX related, so your general misconduct, your violence, your non-Title IX stalking, harassment, damage to property, theft, so they deal with those issues, and it follows a similar process. So there is still an investigation, there is a finding, and then it goes through that discipline process.
And it's separated out to satisfy federal authorities, or it's separated out for efficiency, like you said, so that?
Both.
Okay.
I'm still a little floored about my being a mandatory reporter.
Yes.
The consequences are for my confidentiality in being able to interact with my students
Right.
that are a result of that. Is this decision to make faculty mandatory reporters something required by the OCR, or is this just a university policy?
It's a university policy. And
Was it something that was discussed by the faculty council,
yes, it was.
and the faculty council approved it?
The faculty council pushed back a little bit. Now, that was again before my time. I did not deem, that was not a decision that I made. However, that was also part of the training about the gentle interruption. And when I've had conversations with faculty that have brought up those very concerns, a student comes to me about confidentiality and says this because they need help and support, now I'm required to tell somebody. I absolutely understand that. My response to that is ultimately what we want to do is make sure that that student has the resources and support that they need. They don't have to respond to any email, to any reach out or outreach from our office, but we at least want them to know what their options are. We also kind of instruct or train faculty again about this gentle interruption. Before you say anything further, I need to let you know that I'm a mandated reporter so that the students know that if I say something, this is about, that this individual, this faculty member, this responsible employee has to basically tell me. Yes?
I feel like a pest. I have
No,
to
it's fun.
So the pistol whip student comes to me. Am I a mandatory reporter?
No.
Okay.
In relation,
Wait, pardon?
at Vanderbilt, it's the same situation. I'm a mandatory reporter. Are you absolutely sure that it's specific only to your students? It's also at Vanderbilt?
No, I was just saying that I know UT's system is the one who defined because the responsible employees, the mandatory reporting, involves, again, teaching assistants, coaches, supervisors, and so it drills in much deeper, but I know that was a UT system decision to define who were mandatory reporters and responsible employees.
Kimberly, I thought you were telling me this was nationwide.
No.
Or am I wrong about that?
No, Laura wants to answer this.
Nine inside. So there's no such thing as a mandatory reporter. There are two different laws that require reporting in certain circumstances. Title IX, they're called responsible employees, and clear, they're called campus security authorities. Faculty are not campus security authorities, but they do report all types of crime just for statistical purposes. So that's a variety of people, and schools can designate, but security officers and logical people, RAs, we just automatically report just the data, not who, not why, not investigating, just data. And then responsible employees, I think people overly concerned about it. Really, the responsibility is just to tell the Title IX coordinator. And the Title IX coordinator has exactly one job, to detect a pattern in hostile environment. They actually are under no obligation to go back to that student. That's like courtesy to let them know what services. It's not required. So if you as a professor find out from a student, you don't even have to tell anything to the student. You can just go just to the Title IX coordinator and they can determine, are they reporting the same student that's come up 20 times? Are they reporting the same sports team or fraternity? And they don't have to investigate or take action at all. In fact, you need consent from the victim to even do that, unless there's an ongoing risk to the community that has to be determined by the school through a process. But they can decide maybe we need more prevention education in our curriculum. Like, it's really not this traumatic, you're destroying a survivor's trust experience if you do it right.
Well, if the survivor has already told me that they've told no one else on the faculty, that they don't want anything to be done about this, that they just want to forget about it and get it out of their lives, I still feel this is I mean, I have no problem with reporting it for statistical purposes with no names attached, but in terms of my being able to, my having to report a sexual harassment incident by a colleague that involves manipulation of grades and all kinds of things that really do involve real Title IX problems. I would hate to have to attach the complainant's name to that.
I understand. I've had those conversations with faculty members individually. And again, as I've told them, ultimately I want to just make sure that the student is supported and knows what their options are. And if they do not want to respond to us, they absolutely do not have to. But what I would hate is that you have a student on our campus suffering and doesn't have the knowledge or the resources, and then we have done nothing to support them. So,
What if it's a former student who tells me about this after they graduated? And then that student later comes back for graduate work. I mean, this is the
okay, yeah,
situation.
absolutely. And there's always these, I mean, what I love is every time I do a training, I get a what if and a situation of gray. And so for me to sit here and say absolutely yes or no, I would have to, it is a case-by-case basis to some degree. So the situation or scenario you're saying is that the behavior occurred after they graduated?
No, the behavior occurred while they were still a student. I learned about it after they graduated, and then they later came back to the university.
No.
Okay, so I'm safe. I don't have to.
Can I ask you a what if?
Yeah, sure.
But this isn't, so, because I was having, I'm the person at UVA, but I was having a fight with somebody at Harvard over whether they had the same obligation we had at UVA, and so I'm wondering what Texas's interpretation is.
Sure.
So, I teach criminal law, I teach rape. Students sometimes have a hard time with it, particularly if they're survivors. And so someone may want to come and talk to me and say, look, the reason why I might walk out of class or look glazed over is because I've suffered from this. So my question is, if somebody says, I suffered from this prior to matriculation, right? I was assaulted 6 years ago. Do I have a reporting obligation? Because I think the way UVA has been interpreted, even though it's not a current student or employee, and even though it's not on university grounds, it's affecting the student's learning capacity. So that's your interpretation.
That is our interpretation as well.
So if somebody's raped, as a child when they're 5, and the student tells me about it when they're 25, I still have to report that.
Yeah, and again, the purpose is to make sure that they have the support and the information that they need, not necessarily to do an investigation, but just to provide resources.
May I give a little bit more of a definitive answer here on the legal status? OCR says that in terms of being a responsible employee, any employee who has any responsibility along the chain to take action is automatically a responsible employee. And people whom the students would perceive to have a responsibility to take action. And then schools are allowed to designate people who have that responsibility to take action. So a school can choose right now, any school can decide, all of our faculty members, we want you to be responsible employees because that's part of knowing that there is an enforcement issue. So we're going to decide, along with shared governance with our faculty, we're going to make all faculty members responsible employees. Other schools can say, I only want the heads of departments to be responsible employees because they're the only ones and we want to have the actual responsibility. But the question is, and Laura's also right in terms of the statistical part under Cleary versus the Title IX part in VAWA, is that schools have the ability to decide if you're going to be a responsible employee or not. UT has chosen to make all of their faculty and raises the questions that you bring, and that's had robust debate and heated debate at almost every university where faculty have been consulted over where it should fall. So Vanderbilt may very well also choose to decide that all of you are responsible for reporting it up. And it does have that kind of really tough issue in terms of, does it betray people's confidence? Does it dissuade people from coming forward or not? I'm not going to answer that question, but it raises these complex things that we grapple with.
So Voices Against Violence has those minis, which include dozens of resources, confidential, non-confidential, on or off campus. And does it make sense to equip every single professor with, a small stack of them? So if a student does come and say, then they're in the position to provide those resources rather than, starting, go up the chain rather.
You're talking about those miniature little booklets we have?
Right.
Yes.
Right. Well, I think that the other resources that we provide, again, are law enforcement information. And so I think putting the responsibility on faculty to go over and answer those questions, to be honest, I think is an unfair burden. And so I, again, would prefer that, again, if it's reported to me, one, I get to, again, climate and systemically, is there issues? Am I seeing, the same kind of things that something happened at this particular party so that I can address it, but also that I can give more detailed information to a survivor and they can choose to do that information what they wish.
I think mine's, I don't know, some sort of hybrid question comment. Right? And I know nobody here made the decision to make all faculty and staff
That is correct.
reporters. And it's the same at my university, at the University of Colorado. And I think it's a terrible, terrible decision, and not just because of my experiences. There's literature out there on the chilling effect that mandatory reporting has on people who've been victimized in many ways. National Academies of Sciences came out with a big report a few years ago focused on sex trafficking. And in it, a committee recommendation said that medical doctors and medical personnel should not be mandatory reporters of people who are being victimized that way. Why? Because the message it sends to people is not to tell anybody. And because they know it's better to have these individuals come to the doctor to get treatment and resources versus being afraid of maybe getting ensnared in the criminal justice system. And it has the same effect on a university campus. As somebody who teaches classes dealing with violence against women, victimization, rape, things like that, I get a lot of students who, they don't necessarily even have to come to my office to tell me it happens in class and other places. And I have had too many times go, stop before you continue, and give them this deal. And what they all hear is, never tell anybody this happened to you. Not just me, not just people at the university. Don't tell my mom, don't tell my best friend. And that is the worst possible outcome. So I really wish universities would think about it. Maybe look at the literature a little more and make wiser decisions about who they put in that particular role, because a lot of people don't want it to go anywhere else. But I certainly understand and am sympathetic for understanding if there is a pattern and things like that. But I just think that individual is most important at that time. So it's really complex. But
Absolutely.
I think too many universities are just saying everybody reports, and they think that they've taken care of it, and they've made a mess. It's just terrible.
Yeah, let me pick up on that. I mean, quite often the way that faculty like us learn about these things is because we have a personal relationship of trust with the student. The student knows us, they trust us and think that we're going to be sympathetic and understand. They don't know you and the staff in your office from one iota, and that's why they don't want to talk to you, but they do want to talk to us. I think this is, I absolutely agree with Callie that this is going to have a chilling effect on them. The other issue is something that I do both scholarship and teaching about is statutory rape or sex involving minors, which often, well, of course, it is against the law in many, many cases, depending on the exact combination of who's doing what to whom at what age. Students have written papers for me on this. In fact, students in my class wrote a paper on on this topic. Sometimes students incorporate personal anecdotes into those papers. Am I going to now have to start submitting those papers to your office? I'm just going to have to stop teaching and doing research on this subject if I'm a mandatory reporter now.
Well, I do think
And this
that
is telling on scholarship and academic freedom and teaching in ways that really have not been thought out. And I know you say you got some pushback from the faculty council. Obviously, you didn't get enough pushback, so I'm giving you some more.
I hope IT can be a leader and try to set up, because it's not being mandated to do it a certain way, but do it a thoughtful way that the rest of the nation can then model.
Well, and I was going to ask, especially the faculty in the room, I'm open to what you all think we should do. So a student comes to you and says this, and again, I don't know why they're coming to tell you, whether it's they're needing academic accommodation or they're needing support or help. You know, one, we want to make sure that we take care of our students and we support them. So I'm asking, what do you think we should do?
It's very seldom because they need academic accommodation. I mean, therapists know that sometimes you just need to tell someone and get it off your chest. But it needs to be someone you know and trust. Okay, I think Haley has a question, and then we'll go to Laura, and then we'll go to the other Laura.
I was just going to say, as I'm a senior here at UT, and I've been an advisor at Title IX for sexual assault cases, and I was just going to say, like, it's totally different as a faculty, but having just been a friend to someone going, I think the system that you guys have is working really well in students helping other students report, because you have been working, since I've been here in the last 4 years, I think you guys have done a really good job of trying to make more students more aware of your office and your services. My only thing is get out of SSD because no one goes over there. Only complaint is that you guys are in the corner of the building. But I think you guys have done so much in the last 4 years to get people more aware of services, more aware that things like Title IX exist and what Title IX can do. Because I've heard too many of my peers and my friends and underclassmen tell me about things that happen and not go to you and not know that there are services available. So just as a senior here who's seen way too many bad things happen, like, thank you for continuing to try and push and to continuing to try to make this university where students feel comfortable reporting, because there are still so many students who are not reporting, and we are a hugely underreported campus. For 50,000 students that we had 100 court cases reported, that's, I call bullshit. I mean, I apologize, sorry, for the language, but I do, and so I just thank you for continuing to try to push and getting more cases reported, because it's something that needs to happen, so I'm glad that we have someone advocating for the students. So that was,
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. I'm trying.
Good.
I saw.
Laura Dunn.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you should go too hard in your Title IX coordinator, but yes, the general counsel wants you to be responsible employees. I don't think it's her.
Thank you also for that.
It's a civil liability, which is a real thing, and you don't want to get sued for $1 million. So there is more than one consideration, and I would just encourage the faculty. I understand where you're coming from. It sounds like a very loving place for survivors, and I'm speaking as someone who has been a survivor who's had to confide in people, so I understand the importance. But there is a way you can use this to not be a negative and say, thank you for trusting me at this campus. We can give you confidentiality. However, we do have a Title IX office. They do want to know if this is happening, and we do have rights to tell you about. Could you do me the favor and sit down? That way it's not her surprising them with an email and they're feeling betrayed. You can actually set that up and explain. And that's a lot of what I do with Serve Justice. I explain why something is happening. Because most people respect it when they know it's coming from a good, important place of our campus really wants to make sure if it's the same person that we know that, or if there's education we can be doing, that we do that. And if you want a service at some point, we can offer you that. And you can set them up to walk into her office as part of your efforts.
I've done all of that and still had students say they don't want to deal with the administration. They don't trust it.
If you make it a negative, it will be a negative. But
No,
if
it's
you
not.
try to make it
It's not the way I made it.
related to the legal obligations that are there for a reason, I think it goes over a lot smoother.
I said all of that too. Okay, Laura Kipnis.
Well, I just was going to say that, talking last night, I was making the point about administrators now setting the tone or the intellectual tenor on campuses, and I think this is an example of it, where you see that it's impacting the kind of scholarship or the, just overall intellectual culture of universities, and the faculty aren't pushing back against it. So that's just, a point I would make just related to what I was talking about yesterday. But I also have a question. I mean, I've read very mixed reports. This is on the question of bystander intervention training, which I think I understand is mandatory now, or that's being, handed down by the OCR as part of Title IX. But I've read very mixed reports on the efficacy of it, and I mean, not, that it's not really great, even though it's like, it seems to be like a middle road. It's like, well, this is what we can do. And that it's because of other approaches being more controversial. But my question is, it's sort of along the lines of this mandatory reporter thing, is there a movement toward bringing people up on charges who fail to intervene as bystanders? So are people chargeable now if they're in situations where they students where they could have intervened and they don't?
Not at this institution, and I don't see us moving in that direction. No. And at this institution, we also, and I think at most institutions, we also have an amnesty policy. So again, encouraging individuals to report even if there was alcohol or drugs involved. That we didn't want that to be a deterrent or an obstacle for people coming forward and reporting. So and like I said, I think a lot of institutions have an amnesty policy as well. Yes.
Okay, I wanted to go back to the underreporting. You said that...
Did you say underreporting? Sorry.
Yeah, the underreporting of sexual assault. You said earlier that some students aren't aware of the process and you're trying to raise more awareness from that. What are some of the other factors you see, stigma and other factors that could be affecting, that could lead to underreporting of sexual assault?
Oh, one, will they be believed? Just having to go through the process in itself. Retaliation is another real factor for, or the fear of retaliation is a real factor for why individuals don't want to report. Others we've seen is that they think it's their fault. So, there's several factors I think that lead into underreporting. I think what I'm really trying to do is make sure that our process is not one of those, and that there's not obstacles for reasons why individuals do not want to report on campus.
Okay, I'd like to ask you one final question.
Sure.
And this is not meant as a final question. What is the annual budget of your office?
Right now, it's just me, and I'm building that, so...
I thought you said you had 6 investigators.
Oh, excellent question. They don't report to me.
Okay, let me rephrase the question. What is the total budget of the university's total Title IX compliance efforts, including you, the investigators, the campus climate surveys and research, the training programs, Be Vocal, VAV, everything that we're doing? Does anyone even know that number?
I would say that probably our CFO knows that number, but I don't know because we're in all different places. So VAV has their individual budget within student affairs, compliance has theirs, the Student Emergency Services has their budget. So yeah, I couldn't answer that.
Well, I asked because one of the local television stations that was interviewing me yesterday told me that they had the figure of 1.7 million a year.
I don't know where they got that number.
I don't either. I may try to follow up with them on it. And part of the problem is, although the university budget is, of course, a public document, you can go over to the library and look it up. The accountants might as well be accountants that they hired from Enron. They are so clever at concealing what the university is spending in its various administrative
would
arms.
seem incredibly little. That would seem like nothing. With all these salaries, if you've got 7 investigators, the salaries are far more than 1.7 million.
Well, how much are you paying these new investigators?
Well, with all the staff.
That, again, I don't know since they don't report to me, but it is public.
That's a problem.
So.
Nobody knows. I used to make a point of tracing how much money the provost's office was costing us from year to year under our provost before Fenton. And it had gone up from about 2.4 million a year to 3.6 million. And then the CFO's office started publishing the budget in such a way that you couldn't even tell anymore. But, you know, at the same time that we were being told that there's no money to replace retiring faculty, that we're having to shrink the faculty size of the College of Liberal Arts 20%, my own department's been shrunk 40%, we can't even tell how exponentially fast these various arms of the administration are growing. I mean, that's just a personal frustration. I'm not blaming you for it. I think it's something that every one of us who's a faculty member is very concerned about.
Yes.
Okay, well, with that, let's thank.
One last
There was one last
question.
question.
I really did appreciate your show. Is there any way you would share that, or is it on a website somewhere? I think it's a nice model. And
Sure, I can, if you give me your card, I'd be more than happy to send it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. With that, we will.
Thank you.